America. Live. This is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
You know, one of the things making the rounds are this idea of life hacks, trying to maybe figure out how your life could be a little bit better and how to make sense of what is happening around you. And I think this conversation will be one that certainly will be helpful to you. Might make you laugh a little bit, but also cause you to reflect on where you are in terms of your own journey, your spiritual journey. And we bring back to the microphone Brant Hansen, individual who is a syndicated radio host, a best-selling author, and has worked with Cure International. Talk about that a little bit later. Also has a podcast. It's called the Brant and Sherry Oddcast. It's been downloaded more than 15 million times. He's been named the Personality of the Year multiple times with Christian music broadcasters. Also speaks to the issue of autism, since he has been diagnosed with that as well. And he's been on the program with us as we've talked about Blessed Are the Misfits, because he counts himself as one, The Truth About Us, The Men We Need. But today we're going to be talking about a book that comes out in 2 weeks, Life is Hard, God is Good, Let's Dance. Living at Peace in a World Gone Mad. He's been on the program with us before, but against his better judgment have decided to join us again. So, Brant, how you doing?
I'm good, Kirby. It's good to talk to you again.
You know, after I start reading your books, I start talking like you. I would probably never do that with anybody else, but I know enough about your personality, seen some of your videos, read some of your books. I just thought that was funny because, if nothing else, the last part of your bio says he plays the accordion in spite of popular demand. So, again, I think it gives people an understanding of the fact that you've got a great sense of humor. But as I read through your book, 26 different chapters, very readable. It isn't out yet, so I've been reading it on PDF, which is never as much fun as reading the book because you have all sorts of diagrams and everything, quite the artist that you are. But nevertheless, we're going to work our way through that. And I think in some respects your opening chapter reminds me of the Misfits book because you said there's a mean of a photo, and it's a golden retriever in a helicopter pilot's seat. He's got a headset on, his paws are on the controls, and the caption says, I have no idea what I'm doing. And you said, my name is Brant, and I am that dog.
That is me. I don't know what I'm doing. But that's all, it's good. Like, some people, they get really uncomfortable when they hear that. Like, to hear a grown man who's seemingly on paper, like, well, you could look at the resume and go, wow, he knows what he's doing. But I really don't. And I think that's good. Because anything that's happened to me, I think God clearly gets the credit for it. I didn't plan it. I feel kind of like Forrest Gump. I've had to travel the world to some of the most unlikely places, and I've gotten to see stuff and write about it and experience it. I didn't plan any of it. It's just worked out that way. And I think that's really beautiful. It was highly unlikely, honestly, that it worked out like it has.
Well, you know, I sometimes find myself, because I'm in administration, where we have meetings where they're doing, looking at your strengths and weaknesses and threats and opportunities and all of that. And they're saying, okay, what's your 5-year plan? And I'm really big about planning because, after all, Isaiah 32:8 says, but the noble man devises noble plans, and by noble plans he stands. So we do need to make plans. But if you have done as many interviews as I have, and I know you've done many of those with individuals as well, and find out how they ended up in their position of leadership, how they ended up in this area of ministry, how they ended up in music or in art or whatever it might be, or in the business world, I'd say 9 times out of 10, most of them feel a little bit like, I'm a little bit like that golden retriever in the pilot seat. I don't know how I got here, but that's where I am now, and God has blessed the journey along the way.
Yeah, and it's not me necessarily putting myself down, although my sense of humor tends to be self-deprecating. It's not putting myself down as much as just going, I have to trust God. Like, he makes a way. There's so much scripture about that. Like, in the Psalms where it says, cause me to know the way wherein I should walk, for I lift up my soul unto thee. But there's so much, lean not on your own understanding, but, like, let him make the path for you. He's the way, like, there's something really beautiful about going, okay, I'm going to be childlike about this. I'm going to trust God, and I'm going to be faithful each day with whatever he brings across my path and then see what he makes of it. So that's been my approach, and it's astonishing, honestly, how that has worked out. So again, God has to get the credit because I've kind of bumbled into this myself.
You do talk about the fact that you grew up in little towns in Illinois and Indiana. I learned a little bit more about a couple of those towns, which we'll talk about as we go along. But I think it's an illustration, again, if I were to go and talk to Brant Hansen 50 years ago, or whatever I might do, I forget your age exactly, and ask you the questions, you wouldn't see yourself in this position, nor would I. And in some respects, that's a good thing, because if you knew all the steps that you would have to take, all the missteps you'd have to take, all the difficulties you'd have to face, it probably would be somewhat overwhelming, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and I don't think it would have worked out like this. Like, for me, like the stuff I've gotten to see and do, I don't think my own plans would have been this good. Honestly, I don't know how else to put it. It's been stuff like, just to give, if there's someone listening, just to give you an idea what I'm talking about. Like, I didn't plan to be a radio host. I wanted to be a baseball announcer, and I can't see the ball. I don't know why it didn't dawn on me until, like, as an adult.
Yeah.
I was in college. I'm like, wait, I couldn't see the ball when I was on the field. How am I going to be play-by-play guy? But and then I was a newsman, and they would just leave me on longer and longer and on the newscast, and then because people thought I was goofy and odd. And next thing I knew, I was like just somebody's sidekick, and then we got split up. They moved the lady who was the host of the afternoons. I was on by myself. And I was mortified. Like, I don't want to have my own show. And it wound up getting syndicated, and it took off from there. But all of this stuff is like, I didn't plan that. I didn't even want it. But what I have been doing is saying, Lord, help me partner with you today, and let my words be a blessing. Let they actually add value to somebody's life today. And whoever you bring across my path, that's all I've done. And the rest of the stuff is like he's very clearly making a way for me. And I want people to know that so that they can apply that to their own lives. And like, just, there's something about this daily faithfulness where you ask God, like Jesus told us, like, pray for your daily bread. That's your daily resources.
That's right.
So for me, I'm an introvert, and I'm on a spectrum, like we've talked about. I don't have much social energy, but I literally ask God for social energy for the day because that's what I need. How am I going to get through this? And He is so faithful with that. But that's me asking about today, just today, not next week, not next month, a year from now, like, and then seeing if He doesn't bless my plans because I'm trying to commit my works to Him today. If that makes any sense.
Well, again, an introvert, one of your chapters is Nobody Moves into Assumption, Illinois, but introvert from Assumption, Illinois, which is on the autism spectrum, and look at what God has used with him. So what is your excuse? So we're going to come back and get into a couple of the other chapters. Fascinating book and lots of fun. First of all, about the time my face hit a parked truck. I cannot miss that one, of course. Also, one about the favorite subject of Jesus, and there's some great lines in that as well. And it's all part of this new book coming out. Life is hard, God is good, let's dance, living at peace in a world gone mad. We'll continue our conversation with Brant Hansen right after this.
This is Viewpoint with Kirby Anderson.
Who would have ever thought that classical education would be controversial? The fact that Professor Adam Carrington had to write that classical education is not a threat is another indication of how everything has become political. He begins by asking the question, is education Republican or Democrat, conservative or progressive? His answer is that in a rightly ordered system, it should be neither. It should instruct students about America's history and ideals. One of the reasons such education has come under attack is due to the simple fact that it is a learning approach in many private schools and charter schools and in homeschooling. Classical education also avoids the chronological snobbery so prevalent in much of educational programs today. What is new and fashionable is valued over what has stood the test of time and provides a moral foundation for society. He argues that wisdom can be found in many times, places, and persons. We see in the Greeks the birth of philosophy, wherein men such as Plato and Aristotle sought to understand universal truths by studying the human beings around them. We see it in Christianity and the Christian influence in Western culture. And we see it in America with a political system dedicated to human liberty and equality, along with the brilliant institutional structures of federalism and the separation of powers found in the Federalist Papers and the U.S. Constitution. He's also quick to add that we need not have blind adoration of the past, often filled with evils and horrors. Instead, we should condemn these evil practices and learn from these mistakes of the past. Classical education can inform our current debates and provide a moral foundation on which to rebuild a broken society. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Inflation, go to viewpoints.info/inflation. That's viewpoints.info/inflation. You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continue our conversation today with Brant Hansen as we talk about his book, Life is Hard, God is Good, Let's Dance, Living at Peace in a World Gone Mad. He said in this book, I want to take the format of Bob Goff's Love Does and mix it with my own strange experiences in a way that I think Ted Lasso would be proud of. So very good references there. But I did mention that one of your chapters, about the time my face hit a parked truck. Once, as my face was hitting a parked truck and my face was doing this in front of a large crowd of onlookers, I had an epiphany. Actually, he said I had three epiphanies. Number one, I really, truly have no business riding a motorcycle. Number two, this is going to make an awesome story if I, am still alive to tell it. Number three, what am I doing here is unquestionably first-rate entertainment for the large crowd of onlookers. But you use that to talk about the fact that, first of all, I could make an illustration. Our Facebook pages and our Twitter accounts and even Instagram, those are like the highlight reels. Not too many times do we talk about our failures, and yet those are as much a part of our life as anything else, aren't they?
Yeah, I think, at this point in my life, when bizarre stuff is happening to me or I look dumb, it's at the time I'm literally thinking this could be a good story. Because, having a lighter heart helps you to relax in the moment and not to think everything's such a big deal. And I'm not trying to be cool. That particular story was me in Indonesia. It was after the tsunami happened years ago. I was there to try to help. And someone, a guy was leaving. He's like, look, these vehicles are just abandoned. So if you need a motorcycle, I got one. I was like, no, that's good. I don't need to. I hadn't slept for days traveling there. He's like, no, we're outside. It's super hot. There's a big crowd around. And he's like, oh, just try it. I'm like, no, I don't want to. He's like, no, do it. I'm like, no, man, I'm really tired. No, come on.
Damn.
So I did it, and I gunned it, and I killed it. I kept killing the engine, and finally I did it. And I don't know what I was thinking, but it just took off like a rocket. And I pulled back, and I was doing a wheelie, squealing across this parking lot. And then I was like, oh, no. And I leaned forward, and then I flipped over the handlebar and flew into this truck. And I stood up and tried to make a joke out of it. I hit the thing with my face and dented the truck. And I tried to make a joke, and then I just passed out in front of everybody.
Right.
And the funny thing was later that week, I had to go back like a week later to this hotel area where it was a staging area for missions groups. But they're all these Indonesian guys, and they saw me, and they did like a pantomime, like pumping the accelerator, and they're like, vroom, vroom, vroom. Ha, 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 ha. They were still laughing about it.
Still laughing.
Yeah. So that's the last. I don't have any business on a motorcycle. That's the last time I was ever on one. But yeah.
And the reason you were there, let's just talk about that, because you work with Cure International Children's Hospitals. You, of course, they are healing children with correctable disabilities, and that's one of the reasons why you've been able to travel where you have. And again, I want to commend that to people, because you talk about that every once in a while in the Brant and Sherry Oddcast, don't you?
Yeah, and this is something it's like the biggest secret in Christendom or something. It shouldn't be. And you should check this out. Whether you want to give or not, it's up to you. But at least know what God is doing in the world, because CNN's not going to cover this. Fox News doesn't cover this. Like, Cure are these hospitals. It's top-notch surgical hospitals that do things that are incredible for kids that have correctable disabilities so they can, like, walk for the first time in their lives. And they're all considered cursed. You have any kind of disability in a traditional culture, but it's 8 full-on, top-notch orthopedic and neurosurgical hospitals. They're amazing. And they're all about Jesus. All of it. Like, so the surgeons are praying over the kids while they're on the table asleep. Like, there's devotions that happen for the moms. There's pastoral care. They get people plugged into churches. And there's nothing like it in the rest of the world. So when I first went and I sat in on some surgeries in the OR, I was blown away. Like, this is the best worship service I've ever been in my life. But there's something about healing that's just so stunning. I mean, it's why Jesus' miracles, he could have done anything. But the vast majority are healing. And I'm telling people, you see it, and it's like an advanced trailer of heaven.
It's amazing.
It really is. And you can see why Jesus is saying, look, the kingdom is breaking through.
Mm-hmm.
And he was healing people to demonstrate that. Like, I'm giving you an advanced trailer of the kingdom because it's here. It's available now. And that's why this is such an important work. And if you go to cure.org and you can just see some of the backstory, some of the kids, you're not going to believe it.
Let me just mention we do have a link to BrantHansen.com and then also Cure.org. And those are some places where you could go for some of that material. We do have the Brant Hansen website up, as well as, of course, a link to your Facebook page and Twitter, now called X. And, of course, the book coming out in about 2 weeks. But just before we take a break, I thought we'd get into one other issue, going back to maybe Chapter 5, a genius idea, outsource your worry. Because in addition to the fun stories, there are some really great biblical principles, and one of those is to go to Jesus and recognize that if you're anxious, and believe me, anxiety seems to be at an all-time high, Brant, maybe we should recognize that, as you say in the subtitle, Jesus is not unrealistic in telling us not to be anxious. But one of the themes that runs through your book, and certainly through that chapter, is this idea of outsourcing your worries. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. Okay, so Tim Ferriss is this guy who's like a efficiency or manager. I don't know what you call him. He's a really well-known writer and podcaster and all that, not coming from a Christian perspective. But I actually heard him say that he's really big on outsourcing, so he'll hire like a personal assistant in India to handle his schedule and all his details. And he said as a joke one morning, 'cause he was really worried about something, he, as a joke, told her, his personal assistant in India, he's like, hey, I need you to worry about this for me today. And she's like, okay, and I will. And he said the weird thing was, it worked. It actually helped. It helped his mindset knowing that somebody else was worried about something for him, so he didn't have to worry about it. I'm like, this is why we're told to cast our cares repeatedly. It's in the Old Testament and New Testament both. To cast our anxieties on him because he cares for us. Like, it's the same concept, but it's way better because he can actually do something about it. But why not say, look, if you've got something you're worried about, you can't control, like, this isn't my department. God, I need you to worry about this for me. Now, of course, he's not worried, but you know what I mean? Like, to carry this burden. I'm just going to throw it on you. You're going to have to deal with it. It's incredibly helpful. It's incredibly scriptural. It just struck me as really funny that this guy kind of stumbled onto this truth even when it was just like, I just need somebody else to handle this. And that's exactly the mentality that we can have waking up in the morning asking God to take care of stuff.
Again, when Jesus says, first of all, Apostle Paul says, be anxious for nothing, but also Jesus says that, and of course the Sermon on the Mount, it does seem to me that that is a very important principle. Now, I recognize some people have some kind of anxiety disorder, but the bottom line is that people worry about so much, and one of the things, Brad, I've heard people even in the studio, and when I've talked to them on the phone, talk about most of the things that I've worried about over my life ended up not even actually happening, and I worried about it for no reason whatsoever. And once you have an eternal perspective, as I said to my wife the other day, as a matter of fact, I said this to some other people too, that were talking about, you don't seem to be that worried about stuff. And I said, well, I don't worry about too much, especially you don't need to worry about the small stuff. You don't need to worry about the little things. And in light of eternity, all of it is small stuff. All of it are little things. And there is a sense in which outsourcing your worry is one of the principles I took from your book that I thought was very helpful.
Good. There's one other angle on that with regard to the big stuff. I think Jesus is showing his disciples when he goes out on the lake with them in the boats and he brings a cushion and he's asleep and they're all freaking out. He's like, don't you trust my character by now? Like, even if the ships go down,
yes,
you're going to be okay.
You're going to be okay.
So even if your worst case scenarios unfold, you're safe with him if you trust him. Even if. So there's something really wonderful about knowing that. It's just trusting his character. Like, I don't have all the answers. I can't figure everything. Things are going to happen. But he says, look, you're going to have trials and tribulations, but be of good cheer, for I've overcome the world. Like, even if the worst stuff happens, you're still safe, ultimately.
Well said. Let's take a break. When we come back, I want to raise a couple other questions, and maybe you can be thinking about this during the break. What do you think the favorite subject of Jesus was? We'll see if you give a better answer than some of the kids in the Christian school. We'll get into a couple of other very important aspects of this book, which we'll work through in the next half hour. Again, the book is entitled Life is Hard, God is Good, Let's Dance, Living at Peace in a World Gone Mad. And if you find yourself saying, I want to know a little bit more about Brant Hansen, we have the link to BrantHansen.com and, of course, the information about Cure and about his Oddcast. We need to take a break. We'll continue our conversation right after this.
There is an old military saying, if you don't have communications, you don't have anything. Good information is the key to success, not only for those in the military, but for all of us. You can't take positive, productive, and helpful action if you don't have good information. Point of View Radio's main role is to provide good information, and we distribute that information not only here through our radio program, but online and through our various social media channels. You know that big tech isn't exactly a supporter of what we do, so you need to take intentional steps to keep in touch with us. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at Point of View RTS, which of course stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show, at Point of View RTS. Also, make sure you follow us on Facebook, Point of View Radio Talk Show. We won't overwhelm you, usually just one post a day with information on our guests and what's important. The information you need when you need it. Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook and at Point of View RTS on Twitter. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kirby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Brant Hansen as we talk about his book, Life is Hard, God is Good, Let's Dance, Living at Peace in a World Gone Mad. Brant, let's, if I can, maybe bring everybody to when you were at a Christian school. You're actually speaking to high schoolers and faculty in a Christian school gym. And so you start off with an obvious question. So what was the favorite topic and subject of Jesus? What did he talk about more than anything else? So a couple of kids say, well, love. Nope. Oppression. Nope. Hypocrisy. Nope. Money. Nope. Hell. Nope. Finally you say, wait a minute. Nobody knows Jesus' favorite subject that he talked about all the time? And then you said something you probably shouldn't have said, but that's okay. What kind of Christian school is this? But I thought it was just a great way. And in hindsight, you might have said, okay, maybe that was a little bit harsh. But the answer everybody's probably wondering about, because I asked them to think about over the break, is kingdom. And this idea of God's kingdom and being the kingdom of God is something we should talk about more. I'll give credit where credit is due. We do have some guests that come on the program and do talk about that, but that was, without a doubt, the most favorite subject of Jesus, and it seems to me that that's something we should talk about more often.
Yeah, I mean, he's constantly trying to describe it to us. Constantly. Like, the kingdom's like this, it's like that. He's giving us examples, and it's kind of weird because I grew up in church. We never really talked about it. And it is the good news. His kingdom is the good. Look what Jesus calls the good news. And what I talked about in the book too, like coming to know this is so helpful in life because his kingdom is so good. Like he's a king you can actually trust. And that makes all the difference in the world. But in his day, I mean, you may be aware of this, but like the word gospel predates Jesus. Like they would talk about Caesar Augustus. There's a tablet in Priene, Turkey they've uncovered, and it talks about how the king is here, the kingdom is here, the good news. They use the word evangelion, or how do we say it in the Greek, but it means gospel. The gospel is this: the kingdom is here. It's a wonderful kingdom. It's all about Caesar Augustus, and that predates Jesus. So that's what you do as a king when you take over. You send out messengers and you say, hey, good news, your area's been taken over. You have a new king, but there's going to be better roads and there's going to be better theater and there's going to be, medicine, whatever it is. You talk about why it's better that you're in this kingdom now. And that's the environment that Jesus is coming. He's saying, my kingdom is here. Here's how my kingdom works. And it's the best news ever. And he unfolds what that kingdom looks like and how to live in that kingdom. It's really a beautiful thing, but unfortunately we don't talk about it very much. I think it's kind of strange.
Well, there's another aspect of that, because I'm going to go back to one of your other books, The Truth About Us, because the subtitle is The Very Good News About How Very Bad We Are. In other words, there is another aspect of that, and that is that if you miss the marriage celebration of the king, if you miss the gospel, if you don't follow the narrow way, there are also consequences, and that's another part of the kingdom, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, if you want to, the kingdom is available to you, but he allows us to reject it. And I don't want to reject that. So I talk about this in the book where there's a tendency among a lot of Christian celebrities or whatever term you want to use, where they'll talk about deconstructing and leaving the faith.
That was my next question. Go for it. Yeah, we just did something the other day on a book that's just come out by Sean McDowell and others on deconstruction. Boy, you and I are on lockstep, because that was my next question about deconstruction. Go ahead.
Well, I've seen this kingdom of God in action, and I talk a lot about these stories being at the hospitals where people are being healed and the kingdom is being proclaimed. Like they're sharing the good news of Jesus with these people, and at the hospitals, thousands of people decide to become Christians, and their kids are healed. It's just phenomenal to watch that. I don't want to walk away from that.
No.
So when I read the manifestos of people saying, hey, I'm leaving, it's the hypocrites, this and that, I'm like, why don't you ever talk about Jesus? In those manifestos, why you're leaving the faith, they don't mention Jesus.
Of course not.
And this is no, but that's so interesting to me. Like, why were you in this? I'm not in this for the Christian T-shirts. I'm not in this for the Christian movies. Like, I'm in this for him and his kingdom. So if you're leaving and you don't mention him, I wonder, like, what was the point? Why would you even want to be a part of this? Like, this is crazy without him. He's the point. And his kingdom is so good. People are yearning for it. They don't even know it. But I have a theory. I know it sounds kind of crazy, but I have a theory that people get goosebumps when they see the kingdom in action, even if they don't know that's what it is. And what I mean by this is, like, when I see kids get healed, for instance, they can run and jump and play for the first time. That's an advanced trailer of heaven, the kingdom in its fullness. When I watch reunion videos, you ever watch it, like, with a soldier will show up and surprise his daughter or something in the car?
Or one of the examples you use is when they give a hearing for the first time to a child, or they put glasses on a child that can't see. But one of the examples you use, if you've ever seen those, I'm sorry, I'm crying. The moment somebody for the first time is able to hear real words, or a little child is able to see for the first time, and, I'm just blubbering all over the place. And then to see that and then go, well, there's really no miracles in this world. And going, really?
No,
how do you say that?
Think about that reaction that we have at a deep level when we see. It's adults too. They can see for the first time. They can hear for the first time.
Yes.
And we're mesmerized. People who aren't believers are getting goosebumps. They're crying. People will watch the opening ceremonies of the Olympics and see all these nations in peace together, laughing or singing or sitting next to each other. And there's this grand processional, and they get goosebumps. Like, Why do we react to reunions and healing and processionals and all the nations together and people hearing for the first time and people walking for the first time and people having their eyes? Why do we react to that with such a deep emotional resonance? It's because that's what we're made for. That's our home. That's the kingdom of God in its fullness, and He wants it on earth as it is in heaven. Like, people want this. They don't realize how good it is, but they want it so bad. So that's why I feel sad when people are deconstructing, walking away. I'm like, you have freedom to do that, but I'm not leaving. Mm-hmm. This is too good. I am not giving this up. No way. And even if there are hypocrites in the church or they're hypocrites in my background or whatever, like, I'm not giving them the power to chase me away from the best relationship I can ever have.
Well said.
Why would I give them the power to do that? I'm not going to let them do it.
So let them deconstruct your faith. Oh, so many good points. But let me get another one, because you have a chapter on the gentle art of freaking people out. And you quote from Dallas Willard, an individual that we've quoted here before. But interestingly enough, he was saying, pick a word that really causes you to think about Jesus. And the word he uses was relaxed. Now, one of the things, Brant, I've said before is, and I've used this when we've talked about anxiety and rushing and everything else, there's no record in the Gospels of Jesus ever running anywhere. He's never running. He's never really stressed out. I mean, he's in some confrontations with the Pharisees, but if anything, he's kind of slow when it comes to Lazarus. And so there's never a sense in which Jesus is in a rush. And, of course, we're in a rush. And that word relaxed, I thought, was just an interesting illustration from Dallas Willard, of all people.
Yeah, that really blew me away when he said that, when I read that he had said that. Like, describe Jesus in the word relaxed. And he made a great point, which is, we talk about having faith in Jesus, which is obviously valid, but how about having the faith of Jesus, where he trusts his Father so much, he trusts the character of his Father, he doesn't have to be anxious. Like, he is relaxed. He's asleep on that boat in the middle of the storm. Mm-hmm. And his friends were freaking out. But that was his idea. In that story, that was his idea to go out on the lake. He was testing them. They failed, but his whole point with them was, look, even if the ships go down, don't you know you're safe? And so that's one way that Willard described trusting God. He's like, do you realize that for a person who trusts God, you are perfectly safe in this world? And of course we think, well, that's not true. Bad things can happen. No. Ultimately, you're safe. You are playing from a very strong hand. You don't need to be anxious. And he's telling us that, like, be like the lilies of the field or the birds of the air. A remarkable thing about the birds of the air or any other animals, and I love quoting Robert Sapolsky because he calls himself a militant atheist. He's a primate neuroendocrinologist. He talks about animals and how they don't get ulcers because we're the only creatures on the planet to get ulcers because we are the only ones who can borrow trouble from next week. Animals don't do that.
They're not thinking about tomorrow. Yeah.
No, they have a fight or flight response, but that's about the lion that's chasing them right now. They're not thinking about the lion that's chasing them next year.
No.
Only humans are able to do that. And Jesus himself is saying, 2,000 years before Robert Sapolsky, be like the birds of the air. They're not worried about tomorrow. Be like them.
We'll take a break. We have much more to talk about, and we'll do that right after this.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Continuing our conversation today with Brant Hansen as we talk about his book, Life is Hard, God is Good, Let's Dance, Living at Peace in a World Gone Mad. One of the questions people might have, Brant, is, well, what does relaxed mean? And you use that in one of your chapters where you talk about this idea of earth crammed with heaven. You talk about the University of Oklahoma women's softball team, and if people aren't familiar, they had just won their 53rd game in a row, their third consecutive national championship, kind of a juggernaut. And then you talk about the interviews that they did, and they were working hard. But I love your line. Relax does not mean you don't put forth effort. Peaceful doesn't mean bland. Being focused on a truly long term can help you excel because it removes the intense pressure of the immediate. So if they lose, so far so good, because they know who they are. And it does seem to me that whether you're talking about a softball team or a football team, or whether we're just talking about running a marathon or basically running the Christian life, it does seem to me that we need to understand that that idea of relaxed or peaceful doesn't mean we don't work hard, but we have a perspective, an eternal perspective in terms of the kingdom.
Yeah, and it was really remarkable. I don't know if people have seen this on YouTube. They could probably look it up at the press conference. ESPN had asked these softball players a question about, where do you get after winning all of this stuff, how do you keep the joy going? And that word joy just triggered these three young ladies. And they launched into the most brilliant, theologically astute observation about joy. All three of them, they tag teamed it, where they said, we don't get our joy from softball. Like, we have joy, but it's based on our trust in God and His goodness. So if we lose, that's not the end of the world, but we're able to play with a sense of well-being and confidence because we know the whole world doesn't rise or fall based on whether we win or not. And as they talked about it was so genius because joy really, and here's a good operational definition of it. Joy is a pervasive sense of well-being regardless of circumstances. A pervasive sense of well-being regardless of circumstances. Mm. That's why Paul is writing Philippians and he's joyful. He's in a jail cell. The circumstances don't matter. You still have this sense of well-being. It doesn't mean you're happy in the moment. You could be grieving. But even grieving, and people who are believers know this, you can be grieving and still have a sense of well-being. And that's something that's very difficult for people to understand who don't know how to trust God. But that's what we're talking about. Like, having that allows you to work, it allows you to do things, allows you to take a big swing at life and do stuff because you have got this sense of well-being that your own failure or success doesn't determine your worth. That's a huge asset. The problem is our whole culture is based on your worth mattering or being connected to what you look like or how accomplished you are or your job security or marriage. But that's not your worth. And when we finally trust that, I think you've got this sense of well-being no matter what happens. Does that make sense?
Certainly does. Just about out of time, that I wanted to at least take on one other chapter, and that is the monster to miracle, because, again, we have reasons to trust in God's character. Now, we've already sort of alluded to that when we talked about Jesus asleep in the boat, or you've got a great little diagram there, a cartoon of, I didn't know my lunch was going to go viral, fish loaves and fish as well, or the blind man, or whatever it might be. But in some respects, this brings together two different aspects of your life, faith in God and the work you do with Cure International. And it does seem to me that trusting in God and having faith in Him, and also wanting to advance the kingdom through the various kinds of good works that we may do, whether it's through this particular ministry that you're involved with or many other ministries we can think about. That seems to me to be just a good way to talk about really what you're talking about, and that is the need for us to trust in God's goodness and have faith in Him even during the difficult and down times.
Yeah, He is really good. And the thing is, whatever you pay attention to determines who you're becoming. Whatever I'm paying attention to today determines who I'm going to be tomorrow. That is a fact. And God is very concerned about who we're becoming. So for me, I'm telling all these stories from the hospitals about this amazing stuff that God is doing. So I'm like, look what He's doing. They're not going to report on this. It's not on the news. But He's still doing this thousands of times over through His people. And it is a miracle. People pay for these surgeries, and these kids get to live, in this case, the kids that get neurosurgeries by the thousands at Cure in Uganda, for instance. But my whole point with that is, pay attention to this. Because if you're going to pay attention to just news all the time, you're going to be anxious and angry. We don't need more anxious and angry people. Our entire culture is anxious and angry. If, however, I'm paying attention to the kingdom, I'm actually talking to God each day about what we're doing today, and I'm not drinking from that well of constant fear and anxiety and anger, like I've got a chance to be somebody who's at peace, which is actually Jesus' gift to us. He's like, I give you my peace. And a lot of us, I think, we're like, well, thanks, that's a nice gift, but I'd rather have 24/7 news. Like, no, don't take this gift back. It's too good. And we especially need older people who are at peace. We get frustrated with how anxious younger people are, but look, it used to be you would talk to somebody who's a generation or two older and they would have perspective and peace, but now a lot of times they're the ones that are constantly taking news in 24/7, and they're worked up about it. Instead of offering wisdom and patience and a listening ear, it's like they're the ones that are really upset too. Like, this can't be. So if you're somebody who's a believer who's going to trust God, like spending time with Him, paying attention to Him, this will shape everything and determines who you're going to be.
Spend time in God's Word. Certainly, I think you will benefit from this book, Life is Hard, God is Good, Let's Dance. But also, there is the Brant and Sherry Oddcast. We have that link there as well. You can go to BrantHansen.com, and that is an opportunity for you and your wife to spend some time interacting on all sorts of various issues, and there is on your website a whole list of those that people can dip into and listen to or even subscribe to. So again, those are all resources that we want to make available to individuals. And don't forget that we have in the past not only talked about this book, but also the Blessed Are the Misfits, the Truth About Us, the Men We Need, and even the earlier one, Unoffendable. We've had you on for a couple of different times, and against your better judgment, you decided to come on again today, and I think it worked out very well.
It sure did. It's always good to talk to you. Such a good interviewer.
Brant, thank you so much for what you do. Thank you for being with us today here on Point of View, and we will spend some time in the future talking about that again. Let me just mention that as we go to a break, we will get to some other issues, but let me just simply mention the fact that there are some resources available to you. First of all, if you'd like to know more about the book, we have a link to BrantHansen.com. Of course, he mentioned Cure.org, so all of that is available as well. You can find out more about the book. You can also find out more about what he calls the Oddcast, and some great material in that regard. But we've talked about everything from outsourcing your worries to really addressing this whole issue of deconstruction and the need for us to focus on the kingdom. I think it is going to be something that would be a real encouragement to you. It is a book that every once in a while will cause you to laugh out loud. And so it is published by Thomas Nelson, and you can be looking for it in your local bookstore, but we have information about it on our website at pointofview.net. And brings to the table just a really good look at the world from a perspective, because of the fact that he's on the autism spectrum and maybe looks at things a little differently. And that's not all bad. Matter of fact, it's something that might encourage you to go and look afresh at the Christian life. And you've been listening to Point of View.
Who can you trust? Years ago, many of us could probably have provided a fairly long list, but today it seems we almost can't trust anyone. Educators don't even know what a woman is anymore. Many so-called public servants have shown all they care about is themselves. The FBI has been accused of bias, law-breaking, betrayal, and journalism. It's largely corrupt, with no Clark Kent standing up for truth, justice, and the American way. All of this is why Point of View Radio is more important than ever, and your part in supporting us is more needed than ever. Do your part today in supporting trustworthy truth. Stand with us and help push back the lies and the darkness. Visit pointofview.net. Don't put it off. Take a moment right now and click on that big blue button that says Donate Now, or Call to Invest at 1-800-347-5151. Pointofview.net and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this. across America. Live, this is Point of View. And now, Kirby Anderson.
Second hour today, it is Tuesday, January 2nd, so welcome to the year 2024. I think some of you would like to know how we did at the end of 2023, so I thought I'd spend a minute talking about that and then move on to so many issues in the news. And the bottom line is, as you may remember, we had a goal, and still it's up there in case you would like to join with us, of $225,000. So far, we have $179,289, so we're about $45,000 away from our goal. And if no more money comes in, well, it's what we have. But I thought I'd mention at least that some of you that really aren't worried about tax issues, it doesn't matter whether you give in 2023 or 2024, because of this, we still have the ability to match your gift dollar for dollar. So we still have a match challenge that has not been met. So if you wanted to give this year, January of 2024, we still have some match money on the table. And so if you would like to help us out, that is certainly the case. You know, when I look at that particular goal, I know that it is a relatively modest goal compared to so many other organizations. And we made a decision about a week ago that we would not send any emails out on Sunday. We just thought that was sort of inappropriate to have a year-end ask on Sunday, even though that was the last day of the year. And apparently a lot of other ministries didn't have that same idea. As I've shared with you before, because number one, I sit on a number of boards. Number two, my wife and I tend to give to a lot of different ministries. We have a real heart for these ministries. Quite frankly, if my phone was on, and I always leave the sound off because I don't want my phone to go off in the studio, but it was on, it'd just be going bing, 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 because these were just coming in left and right. And there's always a balance, because on the one hand, I recognize, since I'm a recipient of a lot of asks, sometimes it's almost impossible to get all those year-end asks out of my mailbox because so many people are asking us for money. So on the one hand, I have great empathy with you that are saying, you know, this is really, in some cases, overdone. But on the other hand, in the midst of this, if we don't occasionally say we have a need, then people think, well, you must be doing fine. And, of course, as I shared just a minute ago, we're a little over $45,000 away from the goal that we had set. And if we can't meet it, well, we can't meet it. But if you would want to join with us, I thought I would give you that update. And maybe later in the week, if some more funds come in or we meet the match, I'll let you know. But just before we move on to some topics, we had Brant Hansen on last hour, and I thought there was a wonderful quote in his book that I didn't want to read while he was on, but I heard it years ago, and I've never been able to track it down. Well, he tracked it down. Actually, it was something that Mike Yaconelli tracked down, but it comes from Rabbi Cohen. And I'd heard a speaker use it years ago, and I thought it was such a great, fun illustration. So I think, if you don't mind, I would read it. It's actually from his book coming out. And it says, life is tough. It takes all of your time, all your weekends. And what do you get in the end of it? He says, you know, I think that the life cycle is all backward. You should die first, get it out of the way, then live 20 years in an old age home. You get kicked out when you're too young. You get a gold watch, you go to work, you work 40 years until you're young enough to enjoy your retirement. You go to college, you party until you're ready for high school. You go to grade school, you become a little kid, you play, you have no responsibilities, you become a little baby. You go back in the womb, you spend your last few months floating, you end up as a gleam in someone's eye. I do love that because if nothing else, you know, life is tough. It takes a lot of your time, all your weekends. Yes, it does. And that's kind of the fun of the book, Life is Hard, God is Good, Let's Dance. So the book's coming out in about 2 weeks. I, of course, sometimes get the advanced copy. All I got this time was a PDF, but it was good enough to really enjoy some of his conversation. And so that is indeed the case. After the break, we will get to some of the articles I've posted. But over the weekend, we had something happen. And you might remember last week, I talked about this issue of swatting. What is that? Well, that's when you say there is maybe a murder in process, a shooting in process, and it's directed so that an individual who is being, if you will, attacked has the SWAT team show up, and you sometimes have to come out with your hands up and maybe even get handcuffed. And this happened the other day to the home of the Secretary of State in Maine, Shanna Bellows. And you might remember she's the one that decided to take Donald Trump's name off of the state's primary ballot. And that's caused a lot of people to say, well, and of course she went into this very long diatribe on Facebook, and because she's a Democrat, all of a sudden now the Democrats are upset about this. But I began to do the research and realize this issue of swatting has been around a long time. Jonathan Turley, who we've quoted, has been swatted. Senator Rick Scott, of course I mentioned Marjorie Taylor Greene 8 times. John Paul Mac Isaac, he's the computer repair shop owner that had in possession the Hunter Biden laptop. And let me just, for real quickly, mention a few of those. John Paul Mac Isaac was the computer repairman who exposed Hunter Biden's laptop. He was swatted on Friday. He says, my home was swatted. I was not at home, but the men in the Wilmington Police Department responded quickly. Nothing happened there. Of course, the mentioned just a minute ago, Jonathan Turley, who is the law professor at George Washington University, who, by the way, I'm sure is a Democrat because he said that, was swatted with a 911 caller falsely claiming that someone was shot in his home, in part because Jonathan Turley sometimes has supported some of the statements that Republicans would make. Senator Rick Scott of Florida, Rick Scott in Florida was swatted last week. He said, last night while at dinner with my wife, these individuals swatted my home in Naples and caused that to terrorize his family. Of course, I mentioned Marjorie Taylor Greene has been swatted 8 times. But somehow, she says, the FBI can't quite figure out who's doing this. I got a funny feeling that they'll figure out very quickly who did it for the Maine Secretary of State. Brandon Williams, I mentioned him before, in New York, was swatted on Christmas Day. Our home was swatted the afternoon, and again, applauded the deputies and troopers who responded, but carefully. The Boston Mayor, Michelle Wu, was swatted on Christmas. You have the Attorney General in the state of Ohio, David Yost, Representative Kevin Miller, state as well. You have, for our friends in Georgia, let's see, the Republican Senators John Alberts, Kay Kirkpatrick, Clint Dixon were all swatted on Christmas Day. You have one Democrat, Kim Jackson, was swatted there. Are you getting the idea? This is really out of hand. Now, for those of you that say, well, it's a terrible prank, but it's harmless, no, it's not. I dug this one up as well. There is a man in Ohio who was sentenced to prison after swatting a Kansas man who was killed by the police in an incident. If people come to your home thinking that this is a murder in progress or that they are hostages, and you come out and do the wrong thing, say the wrong thing, you could be killed. I think it's time for action about swatting, whether to Republicans or Democrats. This is something that simply has to stop. Be right back.
This is Viewpoint with Kirby Anderson.
Who would have ever thought that classical education would be controversial? The fact that Professor Adam Carrington had to write that classical education is not a threat is another indication of how everything has become political. He begins by asking the question, is education Republican or Democrat, conservative or progressive? His answer is that in a rightly ordered system, it should be neither. It should instruct students about America's history and ideals. One of the reasons such education has come under attack is due to the simple fact that it is the learning approach in many private schools and charter schools and in homeschooling. Classical education also avoids the chronological snobbery so prevalent in much of educational programs today. What is new and fashionable is valued over what has stood the test of time and provides a moral foundation for society. He argues that wisdom can be found in many times, places, and persons. We see in the Greeks the birth of philosophy, wherein men such as Plato and Aristotle sought to understand universal truths by studying the human beings around them. We see it in Christianity and the Christian influence in Western culture. And we see it in America with a political system dedicated to human liberty and equality, along with the brilliant institutional structures of federalism and the separation of powers found in the Federalist Papers and the U.S. Constitution. He's also quick to add that we need not have blind adoration of the past, often filled with evils and horrors. Instead, we should condemn these evil practices and learn from these mistakes of the past. Classical education can inform our current debates and provide a moral foundation on which to rebuild a broken society. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Inflation, go to viewpoints.info/inflation. That's viewpoints.info/inflation.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, the first month of course, 2024, the second day of the month, and very soon we're going to be talking about the election. But before we get to that, let me, if I can, talk about a couple of the articles we've posted. And one of those has to do with border security and immigration. And the complaint this time comes from an unexpected source. Of course, we have heard complaints from the president about some of these migrants being moved around the country. We, of course, had complaints from the mayors of Chicago and New York. This one comes from the Democratic mayor of Denver, Colorado, who said the onslaught of illegal immigrants into his city could mean, and I think probably will mean, that they will have to cut services in every part of the city government. And the article goes on to say, amid media coverage of leaders in Chicago and New York talking about the influx of illegal immigrants, how that has affected their cities, the Denver mayor, Mike Johnston, during an interview sought to portray Denver as having things even worse. He called his city ground zero for the stampede of illegal immigrants into America's major cities. He said, we are the single largest recipient of migrants per capita of any city in America. And if you look at it per capita, it seems like there's some accuracy to that as well. Let's recognize that the populations of Chicago, Houston, Los Angeles, New York, much larger than the population of Denver. And so he says that Denver has taken in about 35,000 illegal immigrants. Now, again, for those of us right now that live in the state of Texas, and for individuals that are actually on some of the border towns, and we're talking about El Paso, Laredo, talking over there kind of near Del Rio, which is actually called Eagle Pass and things like that, 35,000 sounds like kind of a typical day. We've had in the month of November 242,418 encounters in the southern border just in November. And again, it's sometimes hard to understand those numbers, but here we're talking about almost 8 times that amount just in November, just in the southern border. But again, he is arguing that the reason in Denver he has so many, and 35,000 is a large number, but it's not as large as certainly many of the other cities have had to take in. He holds, of course, Texas as responsible, claiming that Denver sometimes has become the prime destination since it's the closest major city to Texas. And, of course, you've had the governor of the state of Texas, Greg Abbott, who began busing illegal migrants or immigrants, whatever you want to call them, into some of these Democratic-run sanctuary cities. First of all, as a way of saying, look, we are overwhelmed here, and that is the case. You cannot go into a Texas city and not find masses of immigrants, migrants, whatever you want to call them, border crossers. And so that is the case. The number of the possible border crossers now in December, which is still an estimate, but it comes from Customs and Border Protection, is 300,000. we had 242,000, which was announced wasn't announced like the Friday before Christmas because they didn't want anybody to see it, but I did post that on the website in case people had not seen it. Now the one for December is in the 300,000 range. We'll give you the numbers a little bit later. And since the fiscal year began, which is on October 1st, you're talking about 760,000 migrants. Well, if all of those have to stay in the state of Texas or in the states of Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, and even Southern California, you got a real problem. And so I understand why the mayor of Denver is upset, but I thought it was interesting because I then begin to read that one of the things he's decided to do is, since we don't have enough space for these individuals, we'll send them on as well. So again, CBS reported the other day that Denver has spent, interestingly enough, $4.5 million just over the past year to send more than 12,000 illegal immigrants out of Colorado. And so we say, well, where do you want to go? And then they buy them a ticket, usually by bus, and get them on their way. So these people right now, and I think it's worth mentioning, I'm just picking on the mayor of Denver because we have the documentation. I'm sure it's happened elsewhere, is saying, I am offended that the governor of the state of Texas has been sending people to me, but I might as well share the wealth, and I'll send them on their way to somewhere else. By the way, if you have not been paying attention, this has gone from bad to worse because in some respects there have been attempts by some of the major cities, and I'm looking at you, Chicago primarily, but a little bit of New York, saying that they're trying to prevent buses from picking these individuals up. And so now the route of transportation sometimes is by train, and also, as we pointed out the other day, by airplane, buying them a ticket. But you are having a situation in which some of these migrants are like the proverbial hot potato. Remember that game? You know, pass the hot potato from one to another. And so as a result, there is now all sorts of calling from these Democratic mayors, Democratic governors, who are simply saying, enough is enough. Something has to take place. So we're talking about the mayor of Denver, Mike Johnston. We're talking about the mayor of New York City, Eric Adams. And we're talking about the mayor of Chicago, Brandon Johnson, who have all now issued a joint call for faster authorizations of illegal immigrants in their communities, and all complaining about the fact, quote, and I'll quote from Johnston himself, the lack of federal money could impact his community and others. He said, if there is no federal support, there's no coordinate entry, there's no work authorization, then like cities would have to look at dramatically reducing the amount of services we offer or dramatically cut our city budgets, which has an impact on other part of city services. And I don't think that it's fair to anyone in the country, any mayor, any governor, any state or city, for this taking place. But it is amazing how up until fairly recently we heard nothing from the mayor of Denver, the mayor of New York City, the mayor of Chicago, and the previous mayor of Chicago, I might also add, about the fact that there were thousands, in some cases hundreds of thousands of people in Texas. And the argument is, well, that's what you have to address with your budgets. But the screaming that is taking place and the lamenting that has taken place is an illustration, again, that all of a sudden, once those individuals showed up at their doorstep, they began to say, wait a minute, we shouldn't allow this to take place. And, of course, that's the bottom line. There have been some very feeble attempts by this administration to go and to meet with the leaders in Mexico to try to turn some of this around. But we have a caravan heading for our southern border right now, and this problem is going to go for sure from bad to worse. And it illustrates again that even if these are individuals that we really want to have part of the American experience, they should obviously go through a process of naturalization and assimilation, but they're simply being led into this country, told that they need to come back for some particular court hearing. Sometimes now they're talking about a year or two later, knowing full well they're not going to show up, and they're just in the community. And so this overwhelming of the city services, of the schools, of the hospitals, and all the rest continues almost unabated. And I thought it would be worthwhile for those of you that listen in the state of Colorado to know that the Democratic mayor of Denver has said, okay, enough is enough. I agree with him. But that statement should have been made 3 or 4 years ago, and that is an illustration, once again, of why we'll keep paying attention to this and why I'm absolutely convinced this is going to be a campaign issue in the future. But as we take a break, if you'd like to read this article, it is our first article. I have many others to get to in just a minute. But if you just heard a few minutes ago, I did mention the fact that we did not meet our goal. And if you'd like to help us reach that goal, we'd greatly appreciate it. And as far as I can determine, there's still match money on the table. So that means your gift would be a dollar for dollar match. And you can simply go to our website, pointofview.net. We come back, I'm going to talk about everything from my commentary to some real concerns about the future of women's sports and a number of other topics we'll put on the table. But we need to take a break, and if you'd like to find some of the material we're talking about today, as always, it's available at the website, pointofview.net. If you'd like to talk to somebody offline, that's 800-347-5151, and we'll be back right after this.
Many years ago, they began saying that we live in the information age. Well, today there is so much information coming at us from every direction. The hardest thing is to discern which issues are really important and how can I make a positive impact without wasting my time trying to figure out accurate information. Let me give you a suggestion to help with that. Visit pointofview.net. Look at the tabs across the top. Find the one named Viewpoints. Kirby Anderson and others on our team are constantly watching for news to identify those issues that you really need to know about. They boil things down in a brief summary, and then you can decide if it's something on which you want to learn more and get involved. Again, when you go to pointofview.net, click on Viewpoints, you'll see exactly what I mean. You'll see the issues that we are covering right now. And when you like what you see, I honestly think you will, you can slide on over, enter your email, and get them automatically sent to your inbox each day. That's it. Take a minute now, be informed. Pointofview.net, click on Viewpoints. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kirby Anderson.
Back once again, let me give you kind of an overview for the rest of the week. Kind of starting the week off on Tuesday, but we still have quite a bit to cover. Tomorrow, Paul Copan will be with us, and again, some great material from Worldview Bulletin, and a couple other guests will talk about some issues in the news. On Thursday, we will be talking with two guests, but one of those is Lathan Watts. And the reason we're doing that is because there was a very good piece that came out in Newsweek magazine by Kristen Wagoner, who is with, of course, she's the head of Alliance Defending Freedom, and that's where Lathan Watts works now. And it has to do with a particular piece of legislation making its way through the legislature in Ireland. Now, we don't really spend too much time talking about what's going on in other countries. We've got enough problems here. But this one, I think, is helpful because there has been an attempt to try to actually deal with what's called hate speech. And the context is something we've talked about in this program. A number of weeks ago, you had this stabbing of some children and adults in Dublin by a resident from Algeria who is, I guess, now actually a citizen, or at least they're legally in Dublin, Ireland. But this has led to all sorts of protest about immigration. Well, instead of the government addressing the problem of a porous border and maybe too generous of immigration issues, instead the government is focused not on changing the immigration laws, which is what the protests are all about, but actually trying to prevent people from protesting in the streets. By the way, I'm not agreeing with the protest. I'm not agreeing with some of the things that have been said and done. But the bottom line is that this has been the justification for a hate speech bill. Well, as Lathan Watts will share with us on Thursday, and in one of my commentaries I have coming out shortly thereafter, this hate speech bill doesn't even define what the word hate means. And there's a reason for that. If you've listened to some of my commentaries in the past, especially we've talked about hate crime legislation, again, never is the word hate defined, in part because, quite frankly, it is difficult to define in law. And also, it requires that you get into the motives of individuals. If a person actually steals something from you or maybe assaults you, the hate crime legislation says that we should give them a double penalty if they did it because they had some kind of malice, maybe because you were black or old or white or whatever it might be. And I think you should just punish the person for their actions, not for their thoughts. Well, as you might imagine, as Kristen Wagoner points out, the law would allow the police almost near blanket authority to search and find materials on your computer that would be considered hateful. Of course, they have their definition of what that might mean, and as a result, they've even said that hateful could be where you don't agree with certain kinds of gender ideology. Okay, so we can see where this goes real quickly. And I thought it was kind of interesting because one of the supporters of the bill, is a member of the Green Party there in Ireland, said basically we're restricting freedom, but we're doing it for the common good. And it reminds me of the quote I gave to Kelly Shackelford on Friday from C.S. Lewis, in which he said, of all the tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. A person that knows they're doing evil after a while might let up, but a person that is absolutely convinced that they need to enact this autocratic or tyrannical regulation, interestingly enough, will continue to do that. So anyway, we're going to have Lathan Watts on Thursday to talk about that, the whole hate speech law that I think is of great concern. And it relates also to one of the articles we've posted. It's kind of a summary of some of the things that Laura Ingraham pointed out, because once we now have the decision, the unilateral decision by the Secretary of State in Maine to get Donald Trump off of the ballot, didn't go through the legislative process, didn't even have judges evaluate it. It was just a unilateral decision. And again, I do not endorse at all the fact that she was swatted like so many others. She points out that, there has always been this argument that the supporters of Donald Trump are autocrats. Donald Trump is a dictator and all the rest. And she sort of says, who is the autocrat here now when one individual feels that they have the responsibility to actually take an individual, as she puts, leading in every state in the primary off of the ballot of the Republican primary? We oftentimes have people complaining, legitimately so, about any kind of voter intimidation. Is that not a good example of voter intimidation? Anyway, I've posted that article. You can read the transcript for her comments. But I thought it was a reminder that sometimes the individuals pointing the finger forget that there are three fingers, you've heard it said before, back at them. And as somebody the other day, of all things, it was my dentist saying, sometimes they're accusing some of the very left-wing individuals, accusing people of the very thing they've been doing. And I think there's a good example of that as well. But let's get into some other issues on the table. One of those has to do with my commentary on classical education. Over the last couple of weeks, we've been documenting the fact that there seems to be a real push, and I wonder if it is coordinated, against homeschooling. We've seen one article after another criticizing homeschooling, and always they pick some example of some abusive parent who was homeschooling, and that supposedly represents all homeschoolers. And you know that's not the case. Our friend David French calls that nut picking. You pick a nut out there, and then that's supposed to illustrate all the other individuals. And it's not fair when conservatives do it to liberals and when liberals do it to conservatives, when in this case, major newspapers pick a story about some abusive parent who is also homeschooling and uses that to condemn all homeschoolers. Well, now we have classical education being in the crosshairs as well. And so this particular commentary that I posted today takes you back to a very good piece by Professor Adam Carrington, who, of course, asked a very good question. Is education Republican or Democrat, conservative or progressive? And he says, really, in a rightly ordered society, it should not. It should be trying to instruct students about America's histories and its ideals. And he even points out that sometimes the reason for this attack is partially because there is a perceived threat to the public schools from things like private schools, Christian schools, charter schools, which actually isn't necessarily the case because the charter schools are receiving funding too. But nevertheless, that's part of it. Also, of course, it is a problem because classical education actually looks back to the past. It avoids what I refer to as chronological snobbery, which assumes that only what is the present is valuable. And here, it takes us back to Plato and Aristotle. Matter of fact, I might point out in the future, we're going to do a whole hour on Plato, just because many of you perhaps never had a class on Plato and the Republic. And this will be by a Christian who, of course, point out some of the critique there as well, but also takes you back to the Greeks, the Romans, and certainly the Christian influence and the influence of Christianity in Western culture and the influence of the Christian ideas in America, including, of course, the Federalist Papers and the Constitution and the rest. And, of course, in this particular article, Professor Adam Carrington also is quick to point out that we shouldn't have a blind adoption from the past because there are many dark chapters, evils and errors and horrors in the past that we should learn from, slavery and misogyny and all sorts of other things that we should learn from as well. So just by looking at the past doesn't mean that we idolize it, but we learn from that as well. But nevertheless, I did want to give you this piece on classical education in case as your kids are going back to school, you might hear some criticism of classical education, private education, homeschool education. That is our article for you today to read and to recognize that there are some very good answers to that. And this will also link you to a very good piece by Professor Carrington, who is at Hillsdale College, which, by the way, I might recommend is a great place to consider if you have a young person going off to college. I've been to Hillsdale College in Michigan and would certainly commend it to you, Grove City College, and, of course, many of the Christian colleges. But as I've said, for any college today, whether private or public, whether Christian or secular, buyer beware. Check it out, because it's going to be really important. We come back, though. Carolyn Downey says, you know what? We're kind of headed for a conflict. There's going to be quite a fight to protect women's sports, and that's going to heat up in 2024. So we'll end with that particular warning right after these important messages.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Again, the first live broadcast of 2024. There will be many others. And again, enjoyed the interview I did with Brant Hansen, Life is Hard, God is Good, Let's Dance. But let's get to a couple others. This one by Carolyn Downey, We're Headed for Conflict. That is actually not her statement. That actually comes from an individual, Kim Jones, who's co-founder of the Independent Council on Women's Sports. But again, the beginning of this really goes back to when the male swimmer, now calling himself, now herself, female, Leah Thompson, sold the title and trophy from the University of Kentucky Riley Gaines. And of course, Riley Gaines has been getting an incredible amount of exposure, primarily in the Christian and conservative media, but nevertheless it's the case. But Carolyn Downey says it's been 2 years of lobbying by advocacy groups and activists such as Riley Gaines to protect women's sports from male intrusion. More than 20 Republican states have passed laws prohibiting males from competing on K through 12 and collegiate female teams. But overshadowing these strides is a convoluted mess of court rulings, federal statutes and regulations, and policies adopted by various athletic governing bodies. That's why Kim Jones, co-founder of the Independent Council on Women's Sports, said, "We're headed for conflict. It's going to get worse before it gets better," and she predicts that there will be a final fight that almost certainly will have to actually go before the Supreme Court. As we talked about on Friday with Kelly Shackelford, the Supreme Court doesn't like to take these cases, but I don't see how it avoids a case like that any more than it can avoid some of these election cases we've talked about just a minute ago. For example, there are a couple of these cases, and I thought I'd just mention those and then move on to my last piece by Joe Concha, some predictions for 2024, maybe to put a smile on your face or maybe to put out those predictions and see how well they turn out as 2024 unfolds. But in one case, you have Becky Pepper Jackson, who is an 11-year-old boy now claiming to be a girl, or at least wanting to try out for his middle school girls cross-country team, and brought a suit in West Virginia to enjoin a West Virginia law protecting women's sports. Pepper Jackson claims that the law violates Title IX and the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. So we'll see where that one goes. You have another case that's been around for some time. This one comes out of the state of Connecticut. This was revived by a U.S. appeals case last week. It was brought originally by 4 female runners who claimed that they were deprived of prizes, accolades, and even athletic opportunities because they were forced to compete against male runners. I've talked about those 2 male runners who essentially competing in women's sports have completely eradicated all of the various records for women in track and field, primarily, of course, in running. The Connecticut state has no law protecting women's K-12 sports. The state's athletic association said males who identify as females could run in the girls' division by declaration without a testosterone limit. And so this particular appeal is also based upon Title IX. So we're going to see where this goes. The Biden administration, as you may know, is preparing to finalize a regulation that would expand the definition of sex discrimination under Title IX, but unless it is done by fiat, by declaration, I don't see that it's going to pass in Congress. But nevertheless, this article, if you're worried and concerned about women's sports, is our third article there by Carolyn Downey that reminds us of that fact that they seems to be headed for a conflict. But let's, if we can, look at 8 predictions. Joe Concha, who I've quoted from every once in a while, for 2024. A couple of them seem rather obvious, but nevertheless, we'll see how that plays out. Prediction number 1, Donald Trump will comfortably win an ugly presidential election to become the nation's 47th president. So we'll see where that goes. Prediction number 2, Donald Trump chooses Nikki Haley as his running mate. I don't see that happening, but again, there are individuals that are suggesting that. those who have been, we always talk about never Trumpers. There's some people, especially a lot of them tend to be over in Salem Radio Network, always Trumpers, are not for that, but we'll see where that comes. I just have my doubts about whether Nikki Haley becomes running mate of Donald Trump, but that's his second prediction. Prediction number 3, Republicans take back the Senate. He says even the Republicans can't screw this up, but they certainly will try their best. And part of it has to do with the electoral map, if you look at this, meaning that Montana, Ohio, and West Virginia are really up for grabs in the Senate, and that is the case. Donald Trump won Montana in 2020 by 17 points. He won Ohio by 8 points and won West Virginia by 39 points. When you have, in particular, West Virginia, the incumbent, Joe Manchin, isn't seeking re-election. Looks like the governor there, Jim Justice, might indeed win, but we'll see. Ohio, that again, Trump has led Biden by 12 points in the Real Clear Politics average, and whether or not Sherrod Brown wins, I think that's going to be an uphill battle, as well as in Montana for John Tester. So that one, we'll see. But if indeed those 3, or even 2 of those 3, go to the Republicans, I think you can kind of figure out where that one goes. Prediction number 4, the current Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, is ousted as House Speaker. He says that because of people like Representative Matt Gaetz and Andy Biggs and others, there have been, of course, a number of individuals very frustrated with some of the things the Speaker has done to try to keep legislation moving. So we'll see on that regard, and that one may be, again, something pretty easy to predict. Another prediction that the Russia-Ukraine war drags on into 2025. Hate to say it, but I'm pretty sure that's going to be the case. Another prediction just caught me off guard, that Warner Brothers and Paramount Global will merge. I didn't see that one coming, but maybe indeed the case. Another prediction, that's the second to last one, the Dallas Cowboys will not win the Super Bowl. He says, come on, folks, I need an easy one here. America's team hasn't won a championship in nearly 30 years, with the team as a likely wild card entry. Now it looks like they might actually win the NFC East, but we'll see. But, predicting the Dallas Cowboys will not win the Super Bowl is like predicting that the Texas Rangers will not win the World Series. Check that. I think they did win the World Series. Nobody saw that one coming either. And her final one, I did this one for Megan, of course. Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce will get engaged. So there we go. She's definitely Swiftie. And so we have just a couple of predictions, some having to do with politics, some having to do with culture, some having to do with music. But I just thought we'd end on a little bit of fun, because we are now in this year of 2024. Get ready, because in less than 2 weeks, we will have an Iowa caucus, and we will be in the midst of a presidential election. So we have posted quite a number of articles for you to read, and if you would like to read those, they're available at the website pointofview.net. As I mentioned before, we did not meet our year-end goal, but if you still want to help us out in 2024, we would certainly appreciate that. Go to the website or to the banner that is there that says Give Now, and we would certainly appreciate anything you can do to help us out. Megan, thank you for engineering the program. Steve, thank you for producing the program. We will see you back here tomorrow right here on Point of View.
There is an old military saying, if you don't have communications, you don't have anything. Good information is the key to success, not only for those in the military, but for all of us. You can't take positive, productive, and helpful action if you don't have good information. Point of View Radio's main role is to provide good information, and we distribute that information not only here through our radio program, but online and through our various social media channels. You know that big tech isn't exactly a supporter of what we do, so you need to take intentional steps to keep in touch with us. Make sure you follow us on Twitter at Point of View RTS, which of course stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show, at Point of View RTS. Also, make sure you follow us on Facebook, Point of View Radio Talk Show. We won't overwhelm you, usually just one post a day with information on our guests and what's important. The information you need when you need it. Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook and at Point of View RTS on Twitter.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.